I was very lucky and honored to have the opportunity to work closely with Dr. Saferstein for many years. He served on the Barnett Institute Advisory Board, and during his lifetime established the annual Saferstein Lecture at Northeastern University. And in fact, I'd like to personally thank and express my appreciation to his widow, Gail, and his daughter, Sharon, for establishing the award in his memory that we'll be presenting today. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this is being recorded, and I'd also like to ask you to please mute yourselves. Please feel free to post questions in the chat room during the lecture, and there'll be a Q&A following the presentation. The selection for choosing a recipient for the Dr. Richard Saferstein Award is done by a committee consisting of faculty and past Saferstein distinguished lecturers. It's a process that takes a couple of months, so it's not done lightly, and a lot of consideration and due diligence is done in selecting the recipient to honor Dr. Saferstein. It is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Adam Hall, a graduate of the Northeastern University's Barnett Institute and a member of the Saferstein Award Committee, who will serve as the host for today's program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening or good morning, depending on where in the world you may be joining us from. I was really excited to see how many people registered for today's meeting, and it is a true testament to both Dr. Saferstein as well as today's award recipient, who I'll introduce momentarily. I also would like to extend my gratitude towards both Gail and Sharon Saferstein for establishing this award going back to 2018. So I'd like to take a few moments because I know we have a very diverse audience. Some of you were very close with Dr. Saferstein, and some of you I know never had the pleasure of meeting him. And so I'd like to just take a few moments to share a few of my thoughts from having worked very closely with him over the course of the last couple of years. Before we begin, I would like to extend just a brief moment of silence for Dr. Donald Hoffman, who was a very good friend of Dr. Saferstein's and who lost his battle to COVID-19 in April of this past year. Here we see a picture of Don Hoffman and Rich Saferstein at one of the regional NEAFS or NEAFS meetings, where they're just about ready to enjoy a cigar. And I'm confident that the two of them are together enjoying a cigar as all of us join this meeting today. Dr. Richard Saferstein, a leading author and nationally recognized forensic scientist, passed away on July 28th of 2017. His contributions to the field of forensic science and to Northeastern University are immeasurable. He's survived by his wife, Gail, his son, Neil, his daughter, Sharon, her husband, James Brophy, and his two grandchildren, Xavier and Gabrielle Brophy, who just adored their grandfather, as well as his sister, Rochelle Saferstein. No matter how long you knew Dr. Saferstein, or possibly you never even met him, this annual award lecture honors a member of the forensic science community who made immense contributions. In 1970, Richard earned a PhD in chemistry from the City University of New York, and this really launched his professional career as a scientist. Following his graduate studies, he became one of the youngest laboratory directors for the New Jersey State Police Crime Laboratory, and very few individuals can claim such a distinguished position within just months of earning their doctorate. For the 21 years that followed, he led, again, one of the largest forensic laboratories in the United States. In 1998, Richard established the Saferstein Lectures in Forensic Science at Northeastern University. And for the past 21 years, these lectures have continued, with the first lecture being held in 2000, delivered by Dr. Walter Rowe, professor of forensic sciences within the Department of Forensic Sciences at the George Washington University. These lectures are typically held in late March or early April, and the distinguished lecturers are selected by committee vote each October, as you heard from Patty Flint. However, while this lecture was originally scheduled for March 17th, I believe it was, here we are on November 12th. However, I must say that if there is any positive in this format of delivery, is that we have, as you heard, in excess of 275 attendees, whether they're joining us live or whether they'll be joining us to view the pre-recorded lecture after the fact. A quote from Richard Saferstein to Barry Karger. The Saferstein lecture series will emphasize the role of forensic science in the criminal justice system. However, its format and subject matter must be encouraged to be flexible in style and content to allow for appropriate invited lecturers outside of the forensic science community. And this was the letter that accompanied the endowment to establish the lectures. Here we see a list of the recipients going back to 2000. And I think we would all agree that this is a very notable and honorable list of individuals who have made a wide variety of contributions to the field of forensic science in all different shapes and forms. Dr. Saferstein was a proud supporter and advocate for the Barnett Institute of Chemical and Biological Analysis, as well as the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Northeastern. However, it should be noted that Dr. Saferstein himself was never attended Northeastern University, but in combination with Barry Karger and others within the Barnett Institute at that time, he saw something special at Northeastern, and he wanted to endow this lecture series and to see it continue in perpetuity. Historically, the Saferstein lectures have attracted students, researchers, faculty, as well as staff, crime laboratory, practicing forensic scientists, attorneys, law enforcement, as well as members of the public each year. And again, this year we have over 275 attendees, not just from Massachusetts or Boston, but across the country and across the world for that matter. I think Dr. Saferstein would be very proud of that. Here we see just some of the contributions that Dr. Saferstein made to the literature over the course of time after his retirement, or during the time when he was the director, as well as into his retirement. And I'm happy to share with all of you that his next contributions are quite current. And I'm happy to have one of the first copies here of the book that he and I had been working on up until the time of his death, which I have finally, once and for all, completed. In 2018, the Dr. Richard Saferstein Award in Forensic Science was established by Gail and Sharon Saferstein. And again, we thank them for their generous contribution and for continuing this lecture series into the foreseeable future. The award recipients to date have been Dr. Bruce Goldberger in 2018, and the co-founders of the Innocence Project, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, in 2019. This year, it is my pleasure this afternoon as a member of the Saferstein Committee to have the honor in presenting today's award. And we're going to pause for a moment to Dr. Peter DeForest, who, Dr. DeForest, I'm going to give you the spotlight here. If you could please open the award for all of the attendees here to see.
Okay, this package was sent to me under wraps a couple weeks ago when I was under strict instructions not to open it, but now the moment has arrived and I'm going to open this this package. All right, it's well wrapped. White paper and black paper and need a more skilled person here, I think, to attend to this here. I don't know, boy. Okay, so inside all that wrapping is a black case. And I'm not sure which end is up, but let me open it carefully. And inside is a medal. And I'll just hold this up like this. Is that a good way to see it? I can turn it over too, I guess, and have Rich's image on there. Anyway, so I am deeply appreciative, and I thank you very, very much. And I thank the Saferstein family and Richard for the idea of the whole series in the first place. So.
So I realize now that although you do not need any introduction, Dr. DeForest, that I would like to say a few words that I may have said or should have said prior, but thank you for that. Dr. Peter DeForest is Professor Emeritus of Criminalistics at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York, where he taught for 38 years. Prior to joining the faculty and helping to establish the forensic science program at John Jay and the City University of New York, he worked in several laboratories, where his career began in 1960 at the Ventura County Sheriff's Crime Laboratory in Ventura, California. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Criminalistics in 1964 and a Doctor of Criminology in Criminalistics in 1969 from the University of California at Berkeley under the direction of Dr. Paul Kirk. Professor DeForest followed in the steps of his mentors by combining a generalist approach with the highest rigor of scientific analysis. In addition to his university teaching and research activities, for many years, Dr. DeForest also served as a scientific consultant and expert witness for police departments, prosecutors' offices, municipal law departments, public defender agencies, and private attorneys in both criminal and civil casework in the United States and Canada. Consultation has included advisory panel membership on major case investigations in the United Kingdom as well as Canada. He's the co-author of several books, book chapters, textbook, and numerous articles in scientific journals. In addition to membership in several scientific societies, he served as a member of the editorial boards of journals, including the Journal of Forensic Sciences, for over 10 years, dating from the inception of the American Board of Criminalistics. Professor DeForest served as the chairman of the ABC Examination Committee, which was responsible for designing and administering certification examinations in a range of forensic science specialties. Professor DeForest has presented lectures and workshops for several professional societies and at other universities, which included being a visiting professor at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. In June of 1977, Professor DeForest co-taught and helped organize a workshop with Dr. John Refner on forensic microscopy, which was sponsored by the Northeastern Association of Forensic Scientists at the University of Connecticut, which has reached legendary status as one of the best workshops to be held on microscopy. He's received numerous awards, too numerous to enumerate here, although you see some listed on the slide, including the Paul Kirk Award of the Criminalistics section of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences in 1999, which I must mention was 7 years before Dr. Saferstein himself won the Kirk Award. The August Kohler Award of the State Microscopical Society of Illinois in 2008, the Distinguished Faculty Award at the 50th Anniversary Alumni Reception of John Jay College of Criminal Justice in 2015, the Distinguished Fellow Award of the AAFS in 2017, the Locard Award of the American Society for the Trace Evidence Examiners, or ASTE, in 2017, and the Ernst Abbey Medal of the New York Microscopical Society in 2019. He is an honorary life member of the NEAFS as well as the CAC. And it is a pleasure of mine to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Peter DeForest, who is the 2020 Dr. Richard Saferstein Awardee in the Forensic Sciences. As we were making this presentation, as you heard previously, the medal had been sent to Dr. Forrest in advance. And without further ado, I would like to now turn it over to Dr. DeForest to share his presentation with us this afternoon. I would like to encourage any and all questions to be entered into the chat box, and I will serve as the moderator for those questions. I know that Dr. DeForest is looking forward to a very robust conversation following his lecture, because I believe he's going to allow sufficient time in order to address any and all questions that we may have. If you just give me one moment, I'm going to load the next slides that we will be looking at here. All right, so I will turn it over to you, Dr. DeForest. And once again, congratulations and thank you for the opportunity to hear from you today on your background and your experiences and all of the contributions that you've made to this field that we all love.
Thank you very much, Adam. And again, would like to thank Rich Saferstein and the Saferstein family for this distinguished award. I guess we'll go to the next slide. If that is easily accomplished. Okay, and so this is, I had several connections with different people and with Northeastern and with Massachusetts and all that kind of thing. And of course, I do want to be at some point talking about my former students, but I had known Dr. Saferstein for over 45 years. I think we first met in 1972 at a national forensic science meeting. A few years later, he approached me about helping him with a book he was working on. My role was not any of the writing, basically just going over the manuscript. And so the book that we see to the left side of the extreme edge of the screen, to the right side of the major text there, is the first edition of his book on criminalistics. And so I helped with that. And that was ultimately published in 1977. So I don't recall the exact date of the involvement there, but I got copies of the manuscript to review sometime in the mid 1970s. The next interaction was in Rich coming to my home in New York, upstate New York, or they call it upstate here. Like people in New York City think that Westchester County is upstate. But anyway, I'm getting beyond my scope here. But anyway, he drove from Southern New Jersey up here to talk me into contributing a chapter on microscopy to this forensic science handbook that he was envisioning. And so I agreed, and ultimately produced a chapter far longer than I had envisioned, but about 130 pages, if I recall. Oh, you know what I did want to do, and this slide should have reminded me. In the textbook, there's another commonality there in that both Rich Saferstein and I were great admirers of my mentor at Berkeley. So the picture of Dr. Kirk there is figure 1, chapter 1 in the Criminalistics book. So another, common link there. Okay, and then I think the next time that I worked with Rich was he called me up and said that he was going to. Well, he knew we were both going to be attending a Gordon conference in New Hampshire, and it might have been one of two in the mid to late 80s. I've forgotten now. But anyway, these Gordon conferences in chemistry are offered in various subjects and have a long tradition. And Rich had gotten a fleet car, a pool car from the New Jersey State Police, and agreed to drive up here and pick me up. We go up to New Hampshire together for the week and contribute to the Gordon conference on pyrolysis, or pyrolysis gas chromatography, or analytical pyrolysis. So, we did have a number of long-term relationships there over a period of time. The other relationship that was an antecedent is Northeastern University. I was contacted by Northeastern in 1976, and I was asked to teach forensic microscopy over the course of 3 Saturdays in the spring of 1976. And so I did that. And then the next relationship with Northeastern was serving on a PhD committee for my former student, Dennis Canfield, who had gotten his master's with me and then gone on to get a PhD at Northeastern. So I served on that dissertation defense committee at Northeastern. And now, last but not least, certainly, I would like to talk about how lucky I've been. Basically, I've really had the good fortune of having a large number of really exceptionally good students. That is probably the most gratifying part of the whole academic experience, is the students that you work with. And in addition, I've been very lucky in having a great family. I lost my wife of over 45 years to cancer 9 years ago, and I miss her deeply. I have 2 children that I'm very proud of, and 4 grandchildren, and very fortunate to have had them. So I guess I might just mention a little bit more about the career, which I have been very, very, very fortunate to have. And I guess there's some people that talk about let me silence that. Did I interrupt the thing completely? I didn't realize that phone was going to.
It's okay. You're fine.
Okay, I've lost the screen. I don't know how to get that back. I guess
You're doing fine, Peter.
Okay, but I'm, as far as my crib notes, I've lost those. So,
Uh-oh.
I have this Zoom screen here. Let me just see if I get. Do I quit Zoom? That wouldn't be what I want to do. Let me just see if I get rid of this one screen here. There's got to be a way of getting this Zoom screen back now. Am I still with you audio wise, or?
Yes, you are.
Okay, and you, oh boy. I don't know whether this will do it. There we go. All right. So anyway, there's this, I guess, philosophy of contingency theory that at every juncture in your life, you make a choice, kind of like Robert Frost's two roads diverging a yellow wood. But anyway, I certainly made a lot of good choices along the way and had good fortune. And certainly in terms of friends and family, that goes without saying. But also career-wise, I was, as a kid, I loved chemistry, and my parents' friends knew that, and I was bequeathed with all kinds of glassware and ring stands and all that kind of thing. But when I got to college level there, I knew I was going to need a job to get some income. That was going to be an issue for my folks with 3 younger brothers. So I looked around for a job, and the fortuitous thing was I found a job. I knew nothing about forensic science. I'd never heard the word before, but in 1960, I got hired by the sheriff's department in Ventura, California. And it was a job designed with flexible hours, so it fit my academic schedule well. And that's how I first learned about this field. And I then learned about Dr. Kirk and the program at Berkeley. And so I worked in Ventura, learned a lot in those years I was there. And after 2 years in Ventura, I went up north to Berkeley and finished my degree in criminalistics. And then when I finished that, Dr. Kirk, well, it was also summer of '64, the summer I met my wife to be. It was the summer when Dr. Kirk asked me to be his teaching fellow, and that started me down the road of an academic career. Adam, if we could take the next slide, that would be great. Okay, and this was a photograph taken in the summer of 1964, and the 3 of us, that's Dr. Kirk on the left, and my longtime friend Chuck Morton in the middle, and a younger version of me on the right-hand side. We are encased in soot. I think Chuck and I more so than Dr. Kirk, but we were doing a fire experiment, a firewall failure experiment. And so we got back to Dr. Kirk's private office, and the secretary saw us and insisted that we go back out front and pose for a picture. But this soot was really something. You just touch your face, and all the little tiny hairs you never saw begin shedding soot to the skin. And so anyway, it was, but that was the same day that Dr. Kirk asked me to be his teaching fellow. So let me talk a little bit about careers. And, obviously I'm thrilled with my career, and it was great having these wonderful students in the academic thing. I also enjoyed having done casework experience under Dr. Kirk in California, and then I had my own practice of consulting with police departments and attorneys and so forth, while I was in the almost 40 years at John Jay, and learned an awful lot, doing that. It was really a very enriching experience and very, very nicely informed my teaching and research. And so it was just, there's no way I can say enough about what a great experience I've had over the years. I will, I would encourage young people, now to try forensic science, try as a career, but I'd like them to do it with the understanding of contributing to the future of the field. You'll see in my presentation, when I get to the core of the presentation, that I think the field needs quite a bit more work. It needs more science than is in it now. And I'll be specific on that in a couple of minutes here. But in any case, let's move to the next slide. Okay, so this is the abstract that I put together for this. Basically, what I'm getting at here, you can read it on your own. I'm not going to read it to you, and you don't need to read it, but it's there for you to read if you want. But the point is that I think what we're doing in our field is very incomplete. We need more science on the front end. In fact, it's even non-existent to have science at the crime scene in many jurisdictions. There's a need for the scientific problem to be investigated in the laboratory to find before anything is recognized and collected and transmitted to the laboratory. It's at the scene that the scientific problem needs to be fully circumscribed and recognized. And as a field, we have failed in doing that and insisting on having scientific important, essential scientific input at the place where the evidence, or what I'm going to be calling traces, is generated. This is not a trivial problem, and I think it's obviously quite clear to people that evidence that isn't brought to laboratory is never going to contribute to a case solution. But what may not be so clear is that simply walking into a crime scene and picking up some obvious things like a bloody knife and that kind of thing isn't enough. There needs to be a recognition of the totality of the traces that have been left in the course of the event taking place, so that the whole problem that is going to need to be understood to solve the case is recognized. And then that would direct what traces will be further examined. So, I've got a little phrase in here that things that aren't recognized at the crime scene as being significant are lost and gone forever. They can't contribute to the case solution. Once the scene is released, there's no going back. So the lack of science on the front end is a problem that is not widely recognized, but it is a serious problem. And I would like you to reflect on my last sentence there. How did we get here? How did this come about? How did we get to the point where the really important part of the investigation, the front end of it, is not being properly addressed? So let's take the next slide, Adam. Thank you. Okay, now I would recommend some of these readings. I wouldn't insist you read both of Carol Cleland's pieces, but they basically are a theoretical discussion of historical science. And by historical science, she means science that is investigating the past. Events of the past are the subject of historical science. So clearly, a crime scene, that crime scene, the event that took place there, is something that should be studied by methods of historical science. Now, common historical sciences, or more common ones, or more commonly recognized ones, would be archaeology, for example, or paleontology, even things like astrophysics, cosmology. I'm getting a little far back there, but anyway, the idea of really understanding what's happened in the past from an examination of the traces that are left behind from the events that took place is the key to understanding that past. And I'm going to be getting into a little paper that Patrick Mazzini and Brooke Camrath and I wrote for a web-based journal. I think that's what you call it. I don't know. I'm not fully comfortable with some of the new technology now, but basically, I want to get into the discussion of what we mean by trace evidence and what we mean by traces of an event. So Adam, if you could give me the next slide, that'd be great. And Adam, thank you very much. You're really doing a great job with this. I have a great respect for you, and I want to get to know you better. But anyway,
Thank you.
So as an adjective, we are in the habit of talking about a trace of something as being something small. And I want to get away from having that restriction, because a trace doesn't have to be small. There's been a recent discovery of a very, very large crater on the far side of the moon near the South Pole, called the Aitken Plain, I guess it is, or whatever the right term for it is, but Aitken, you can look it up and read a little bit more about it. But it's described as being the largest known crater in the solar system. It's over 2,000 kilometers in diameter, which is, I guess, what 1.6K miles. But anyway, so a trace can be huge. It doesn't have to be something small. And so the trace is a remnant of some past event that we need to investigate scientifically to really understand the event. This is the key to understanding the past, these kinds of traces. So as an event takes place, traces of that event are produced in the physical world. And so some of the terms that might be familiar here to this idea of a trace being a noun are the idea that something vanished without a trace, or no trace could be found. Let's try the next slide here. We've already talked, okay. So some other synonyms here that are important. I try to put this in the context of this historical science. So a vestige, I'm not going to read these here. You can read them, but we're basically using these things under different names that we're going to put under the general heading of a trace as subject of study for understanding the past. And in our case, it's going to be focusing on events that are of interest in the legal context. They may be accidents or crimes and so forth, but they are events that we want to study scientifically to understand what the event is. So one that may be more emblematic of accidents that are very common is if you are driving along a highway next to what they now call Jersey barriers, these concrete barriers, you don't go very far before you see smeared material on the concrete. And there are numbers of these that have accumulated over a period of time. Some are relatively fresh. There may even be traces of material on the pavement below them. There may be, rubber abradings, there may be scrapings of paint, plastic, and all this kind of stuff. But these are traces of a particular event, and some of those events were certainly tragic ones for some of the people that were involved in the vehicle that left that trace. I hope I'm not being too redundant here, but I want to drive home the point about the need to consider traces to understand a past event. A famous trace, and a very large one, is the iridium, I guess, enrichment zone at the boundary of the Cretaceous and Tertiary, or now Cretaceous and what is it called now? I've forgotten the term, but anyway, what was called the KT boundary up until recently. And so all around the world at that boundary is an iridium enrichment, iridium being a very rare element in the Earth's crust, but expected to be very, very, or much more prevalent deeper in the Earth and in many extraterrestrial objects that strike the Earth, including asteroids and meteors and so forth. So in that, understanding that trace, recognizing it first of all by Luis Alvarez and his geologic, both son and father had PhDs, the first in physics and the other in geology, and they worked together in theorizing about what this trace represented, and seeing the enrichment in the material from the trace suggested an impact with some extraterrestrial object, and then going further and finding other traces of shocked quartz and that kind of thing, led them to further support their hypothesis. But there was no impact site known to take that theory further until they recognized that a petroleum prospector who had been prospecting via airplane, having a little magnetometer outside the airplane, discovered ultimately this huge crater off the Yucatan coast, and that's now been thoroughly studied and fits the bill perfectly for an impact at 66 million years ago that has accounted for the fact that there are no dinosaur traces, no dinosaur fossils at that level. What was that? Anyway, so there were no traces of dinosaurs above that KT boundary, but the dinosaurs are prevalent below that. In fact, they were a dominant species on Earth for nearly 200 million years prior to the impact at 66 million years ago. So, I'm just trying to enlarge on that idea of a trace, and the trace being, a material remnant, something indicating a past event that, is not limited to size. We have a very commonly used term, trace evidence, in forensic science that is mainly used to look at things that help associate one thing with another. So it's associative evidence, linkages by trace evidence. But I'm going to get into another chart in a minute here that will hopefully clarify some of that. Okay, Adam, thank you. Okay, so Patrick and Brooke and I tried to work on a graphic here with the help of Pierre Margot and Claude Roux and so forth to try to indicate what we mean by trace evidence and what when we talk about traces generally, traces that are indications of the past event. I think the next slide will give us a bigger view of the the first couple of boxes on this thing. So let's go to that. Okay, so these activities that take place at some point in time end up having a physical effect and producing traces of those events. And it's the scientific investigation of those traces. What's going on? I guess I should have. All right. Okay. So somebody saved me on that one there. But anyway, we've used this term maestro before, that the scientist that is looking at the big picture, and it has to be somebody that looks at the big picture. You know, again, the idea of simply, walking into a crime scene and seeing some obvious stuff may not, or it may address the problem, but it most often will not address the complete thing. So this idea of the scientist that has a generalist background, analogous to a skilled musician who may not be a particularly accomplished with a given instrument in the orchestra, but has an understanding of the contributions of all the instruments, would be the maestro. So it's not that the scientist at the crime scene that is the generalist or maestro is an expert in all forensic areas, by no means, but the maestro in that context knows who to go to, how to get the relevant expertise that might be needed for that. And so in some ways, this idea of looking at these traces and sorting out what's a relevant trace that relates to the event being investigated, and eliminating non-relevant traces is a daunting task. And it can be analogized to the idea of extracting a signal from a noisy background. And so we do need skilled use of scientific knowledge and observation, and the scientific method to make this distinction. Let me try the next slide now here. Okay. So I think this is kind of self-explanatory, whether you can, whether it's on something you can take away from the scene, or whether you have to document it and collect samples, from the scene. But the major point being that in order to make the selection between the relevant and non-relevant, you've got to develop hypotheses that produce informed selection. In other words, we don't want to trivialize the task involved here, but you've got to be able to recognize relevant from irrelevant. And you want to be sure that at the scene, things that are documented and collected are done in an informed way. We don't want to overload the laboratory with a bunch of black plastic trash bags full of junk, but at the same time, we don't want to leave important traces at the scene. So again, it is a daunting task. It's not to be trivialized at all, and it really calls for the best abilities of a scientist at the scene. And again, this is not the norm, unfortunately, and it's what I want young people to think about in the future. I'm 79 now, and I think, reaching the end of my productive, maybe I'm already there, I don't know. But yeah, but I think the future improvements will be made by people far younger than I am, and that's something I would encourage at the utmost. There is that we properly understand that the scene is where the important decisions need to be made. I think the next slide would be important here. So, okay, now the first box, this process that we're talking about, that is not something that just happens. It's done in an iterative sense, looping through, considering various possibilities and developing hypotheses and testing them and so forth. And then the things that are determined to be non-relevant are left. The inquiry doesn't go any further with those, and we don't waste time. I mean, a lot of time is wasted in criminal investigations, going down the wrong path, the garden path, so to speak. And it's very important that in terms of resources and effectiveness, that this kind of selection be made at the scene. Now, moving over to the relevant side here and then moving down, many of the traces at the scene will do more than simply decide the whodunit. They can provide information about other questions. And so I've got some of the interrogatives in there: what, where, when, why, who, and so forth, or how. Who is on the left and can be contributing to both the associative evidence thing, the whodunit, identifying a source, and that kind of thing, can also contribute to deeper understanding of details of the event. All right, so I hope I'm not boring you to tears here with this, and so let's move to the next slide, Adam. And okay, and this is of course the overall slide again. So and this is a slide that or illustration that illustrates the transient nature of traces. Before the event of interest takes place, there may be, or there will be, traces there of some, pre-event traces from an earlier event. Okay, and then of course, depending on how well the scene is handled and how soon it's recognized as being an important scene, the number of things that happen afterwards that may obscure those of most relevance, the idea is to minimize those, to minimize post-event activity that would obscure these traces. So we have to, the relevance depends upon, recognizing pre-existing things as being non-relevant, and then, making sure that additional traces aren't produced that would obscure the most relevant traces. And of course, there's always the possibility of some post-event activity. I mean, there's really no such thing as a pristine crime scene. I mean, somebody discovers the body in that case, or whatever it might be. But the chance of a scene being really pristine is pretty slim. But that doesn't mean there's any excuse for letting things get out of hand. And so, but the earlier the scene is preserved and the scientists can begin trying to interpret it, make observations and hypotheses and that kind of thing, the better. So, and again, this may seem like a very difficult task. It is. I don't want to minimize the difficulty that this entails, but we need to improve the situation we have currently. We're very often the traces at a scene are not adequately recognized, and the selection between the relevant and non-relevant things is not made. I guess my next slide then, Adam. Okay, now there are many cases I could use to illustrate some of these things. This case that I'm going to be illustrating right now is, I've got only one little part of it I'm going to show you, but there are many aspects to it. But this was from a police shooting from several years ago, where I was brought into the case by the district attorney's office a few days after the shooting. And I had some of my former students, really able and experienced people, accompany me. But this scene had already been thoroughly, there'd been a crime scene investigation and reports written and so forth in the previous few days. But in looking at this, there's more here than meets the eye. Now, this had been treated in the crime scene notes and in the reports as BIM1, bullet impact mark 1. So it was recognized as being a graze mark left by a bullet. And it was documented to the extent it was photographed from a few feet away. And its distance from the floor had been measured, and the distance from a wall where the ultimate impact of the projectile took place was measured. So we had a horizontal and a vertical measurement, and a what I would call a distant photograph, not a an active documentation of photographs. So when I saw this, I happened to have a camera around my neck. I'd lugged a lot of camera gear with me, but this was an early digital camera I had around my neck, and I'd never used the digitals at a crime scene before. I had all my camera cases with me with all my fancy stuff, but I recognized at this point this was something that I could document adequately. To be able to document what I saw as being important here adequately using the camera around my neck. Now, I looked at this and I recognized, yes, it's a bullet graze, and the bullet is traveling the way the arrow is, from left to right. But there's more to it than that. We can tell that the bullet is in stable flight when it makes the impact here. When it grazes this painted steel, it's in stable flight. Okay, then the next photograph, whoops, that's okay. Okay, this is now the other side of this narrow hallway. This was in basically a rental storage facility, what had been maybe in the heyday a big warehouse, but now it was subdivided into the rental spaces for the public to store excess possessions. So we have that thing we just saw. This is another bullet graze traveling down the hallway as well, but because this is photographed on the other side, it's right to left in this photograph. And the evidence is clear that that's the way this bullet is traveling. But this is not like the other one at all in terms of what we're observing here. This is very different. This, from examination, tells us that this bullet was destabilized, and it tells us further that it was a jacketed bullet that the jacketing was damaged on. So we have some of the lead core is rubbed against or braided against the paint. Some of the copper jacket that has been damaged has gouged out some of the paint. And the bullet, is not leaving a nice symmetrical mark like it did before. I know that Adam made a composite of these to try to put both of them in one place. So let's look at that, Adam. Okay, so you can see them both at once. Now, again, this wasn't recognized at the time. Again, I think it required the presence of an experienced scientist with, when the experience is very important. It's not just the in-depth scientific knowledge, but it's also experience that are essential. And I would even go further to say that ideally, it would having a team makes it even more effective in terms of not overlooking things. But in any case, seeing both these now, we see how very different they are. Now, this became important because knowing that the bullet that was on the right side of the hallway was destabilized suggested it hit something else first. And doing a little bit more of the contextual aspect to it, we learned that at the autopsy, there was a wound in the right elbow of the victim. And the direction of the wound, front to back or back to front, wasn't totally ambiguous. It had some ambiguity to it. So, any case, this ultimately tells us that the shooting victim was facing away from the shooter when that bullet injured the elbow. Okay, and again, this is one aspect of a much more complex case, but it's a key aspect to it that had gone unrecognized to that point, and very, very important. All right, I think we're getting near the end of the presentation here, and I'm probably running out of time here. Now, let me loop back to the other kinds of trace evidence. And what we have here, as you can see from the upper inset, we have a Scotch magic tape physical match of torn tape. So we have a situation where tape has been pulled off the tape dispenser and cut using the cutting bar that's part of the dispenser. Now, what we see in the photograph is the end product that we achieved. This has been done with the assistance of one of my former students, Matt Arnake, who went on and got a PhD and is now, I believe, if Adam can correct me, I think Matt and Adam worked together in the Mass State Police Lab, and then both got their PhDs later on. And Adam has stayed with the forensic science, and Matt has gone on. And just a little comment on that. It was my hope, my aim, I don't know how successful, but I didn't want to narrowly educate people that could only do forensic science. What I wanted in my goal was to have people that would be not just, accomplished technicians, but scientific problem solvers. And I think I succeeded with many of my students, of whom I'm exceedingly proud. And to the extent that I can take some credit for it, I'm prouder still. But anyway, so Matt was working for me in my home lab when we got this case. And basically, I won't mention the shipping company, but one of the big shippers received a package of jewelry to be shipped from New York to California. And when the package arrived in California, it contained ballast, just some weighty object, and not the valued jewelry. And a little closer look at it, the packaging by a layperson showed that it had been opened and taped together using this Scotch magic tape. So the shipping company contacted me, and they had a theory. In the shipping company, they have a special room for handling high value items. I mean, it seems a little silly to me, but I'm not an expert in shipping. But the high value items are tagged and handled separately from the things that get into the mainstream there. In other words, there's a little red flag, here, oh, I'm valuable, that's put on these things. And so anyway, the theory that they had was that an employee of the company, of the shipping company, that worked in this office that did the processing of the high value items had opened the package and retaped it using this tape. So they sent me the tape dispenser, a roll of the tape, and the package. And Matt Arneke and myself worked out a procedure. Matt had very carefully removed, there were 10 segments of this tape resealing the package. It was done very, very carefully with 10 segments of this tape. And Matt very carefully peeled away each of the 10 segments without damaging them and placed them on regular 3x1 microscope slides. We then took those slides. Most of the fragments have two torn ends, and we know that in theory, when the tape is taken from the dispenser, there's going to be a trailing edge that remains with the dispenser, and a leading edge that sort of becomes a trailing edge that's torn away. And we suspected that tearing operation would optically modify the polymer that the tape was made of and change its birefringence, change its double refraction. And so we examined these with between cross polarizers, and very quickly could sort out what was the trailing edge and leading edge. So we saved innumerable time matching the wrong, attempting to match the wrong ends. And then I have a big comparison scope, or a scope with big stages on it. So the next step was that after we had worked out which edge was which, leading versus trailing, that simplified, of course, the number of comparisons that were necessary. And rather than take the tapes off the slides and juxtaposition them on a slide together, like was ultimately done here, the slides themselves, the 10 slides with the I guess it was 11 with the well, no, it became 11 later on. This has been a few years and I've forgotten some of the details, but basically the 10 pieces, each one on an individual microscope slide, were placed on the stages of the comparison microscope, and very quickly a quick association could be made. So Matt was able to take all 10 pieces and arrange them in the correct sequence end to end. So he now had a 10 segment long length with two ends, and one, of course, was a trailing edge, and one was a leading edge. And so we took the tape dispenser and took the piece off of that, the last piece that had remained after the last piece had been used, and expected maybe we'll get a hit here. Maybe we'll be able to show that the last taping with that dispenser was what was used to reseal the package of the purloined merchandise. Well, a bit surprisingly, but underscoring the value of the approach, we eliminated that piece that was that remained with the tape dispenser is not the one that was the last one or not, the last one taken off before that was not the one that was the last one used in wrapping the package. So here we have this 10 segment sequence, but the dispenser is not used to directly produce that. There's no direct association. So I asked the attorney, or whoever it was that hired me from the shipping company, to get me other things that might have been used in the office to where that same tape might have been used. And he got a few things for us. And what we see in front of us here is the match affected with a piece of tape from the end of what Matt had put together with a piece of tape that had held the guy's timesheet to the wall. And this is a very persuasive association. It seems counterintuitive, but when you tear something apart, the chance of it being mismatched is very, very small. And depending on what it is, the probability gets very, very small. There was no question here with this, that Matt unequivocally matched all 10 pieces together, and then this piece eliminated the one from the dispenser, and then was able to match the one from the timesheet. And so it was, and then so it went to get this photograph. Matt took the two matching segments and juxtaposed them on the same slide, and then we got this photograph. So, you know, one major point here is that associative evidence can be extremely persuasive, even though very often we can't assign a probability to it. Now, there's some people that argue that don't really, there may be statisticians or whatever they might be, but are not experienced forensic scientists and don't understand that one can have a very persuasive association developed, whether it's a physical match like this or other kinds of physical associations that approach a very high degree of certainty, but defy assigning a probability number to. And I hope, you know, I've gone through the general idea of what traces are, and I wanted to go beyond the idea of the associative evidence being the only use of the word trace, and talk about the trace in a more general thing in investigating the past, but then circling back and doing this one example of a case that is more traditional trace evidence domain. You know, but again, this is now an associative, you know, evidence case. It tells us a lot. I mean, it tells us, yes, the switch of the jewelry probably took place in the safety room there, where this was supposed to be high security, and that the fact that it had the suspect's timesheet affixed to it, you know, gave us further indication. So anyway, it all kind of came together. Interestingly, and this, one reason I don't mention the shipping company is that they basically fired the guy. They did not file any criminal complaint, so he's got another job somewhere else. But anyway, that's the way they do these things. They pass the problem along to somebody else. I think that's it. Adam, with the slides, is that the case? We have the time for questions and discussion now. And has there been an accumulation of questions, Adam, or not?
So we have a couple of questions, and I have a couple of questions myself, but I would at this time encourage, you know, anyone to enter questions into the chat, and then the best way I think to handle that is I think it might be more interactive if you could, then I could call on whoever had asked the question. You could take yourself off of mute at that time, and, you know, just ask your question directly. Also, if as many people as possible could turn their videos on, that might be nice, so that Dr. DeForest can just see how many people have joined us today. You can click on the, I'm not sure what view you're currently looking at, but on the upper left-hand corner, you'll see what shows like a grid view. It's kind of a series of squares. It should be on the upper left-hand corner of the video screen window where you see all of the participants.
Yeah, I don't see it on mine. There are other icons up there, but on the left side, I don't see a grid thing. And down below,
I believe you have to stop sharing your screen, and it's on the right side under view.
Nice.
Oh, well, thank you, Brooke.
You're welcome.
I recognize your kiwi fruit there. So repeat that again, because I am a blithering idiot here. So share screen is what we want to click on?
No, you're fine. Now it's just going to be on the right, on the top right, there's a little box that says view for Mac users. And there's one that is a 3x3 grid.
The gallery, yeah,
Mhm.
okay. Okay, so I see some people. So,
So why don't I'll ask the first question that had been posed. So if at this time, could I ask Marie to take yourself off of mute if you'd like to ask the question yourself?
Hello, Peter. It's Marie Samples here. My question was, I'm doing good. My question was, of all the cases that you've worked on, which one did you find to be most personally fulfilling?
believe it or not, I missed the first part of the question. Maybe I'm just coming down a little bit here. So what was the first part of the question?
Of all the cases you've worked on, which one have you found most personally fulfilling?
I don't know. I've enjoyed working a lot of them. Some of the ones that are totally, inconspicuous, don't have any, public following or whatever it is, notoriety, can be the most interesting ones to work on, to present the best, mental challenges. I mean, this is an intellectual exercise. If you're doing the recognition of traces, it's a very challenging intellectual exercise, and very fulfilling. I mean, it's wonderful when you are able to put the pieces together and solve the puzzle. It's just a really neat thing. It's like the feeling you had in physics class years ago when you labored over a problem for hours and finally got it to work it out right. But anyway, so I guess the answer is I enjoyed many of them, and so I don't know. Do you have any? I mean, you've worked a lot of cases. Do you have any ones that stand out as being most fun, most enjoyable, most challenging?
Well, I'm with you. I always said that even though the work every day was the same, quote, the same, it was the big variety that made everything interesting, having different twists and turns every day at work.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the point I tried to make earlier. Maybe, you're making it better than I did, but, one of the real positive attributes, this is now being addressed to young people that are not in the field, that are considering it. The aspect that there's variety is one of the well, it's a challenge, but it's also one of the things that makes it most interesting. So anyway,
For our next question, I'd like to turn it over to Jalissa Thomas, who had a question that she entered into the chat.
Hi, Dr. DeForest. Thank you for the really good presentation. So I know you mentioned in your presentation that there's an increased need for, or at least you suggest that there needs to be more science used at the crime scene. But then you also mentioned that experience is also a really important aspect of, crime scene investigators. And I think that might be why a lot of jurisdictions tend to hire ex-police officers or just police officers looking for promotions. So do you have any suggestions about how to combat that issue? Like whether it's just
Yeah, I mean,
hire more scientists?
we are, I'm sorry, I stepped in you there. We're a far distance from realizing what I'm advocating. There are very few people with the requisite scientific background and experiential background to do what I'm advising. But I'm talking about long after I'm gone, I would like some people to really work toward getting the that goal reached of having, first of all, there's very little recognition on the part of the general public or, lawyers or police administrators or anything about the nature of the crime scene and what a challenging scientific problem it is. So somebody told me my online privacy is not protected here. Let me see if I can get rid of that. I don't plan any things I'd be embarrassed about here, but let me get rid of this. All right, I don't see I guess this is one of my security things from the, I'm gonna, do I hit the red dot and will that take the whole screen away, or maybe I'll just turn this off. It's off now, I guess. Where am I here? Sorry about this. Yeah, I don't know my own. Let me try making it minimizing if that gets rid of it. No, gets rid of the whole thing. Somebody gave me a good hint before about how to get my, let me get rid of this security program first. Okay, I got you guys back again. All right. So was that, Ms. Thomas, was that answer clear to you? You see the point? I mean, you recognize that this isn't something that you can, achieve off the shelf. It's people like this are a rarity, but we need them. So
Thank you.
well, look at all Skip Palahniuk's books there. Holy cow! Look at that. It's not the same library I spent a night in years and years ago in Skip's house, but I didn't sleep much that night because of all the books to take down from the shelves. But I don't know what the rest of you see what I'm seeing with Skip's study there with all the books.
Yes. I have a follow-on question to the question that Jalissa had posed. I'm curious if you have any insight on what may have led to jurisdictional differences between agencies where some have law enforcement sworn officers that are the primary evidence collectors, whereas others have civilian scientists and yet others have some combination of the two. During the course of your presentation, I think you pretty strongly alluded to, the importance of having scientists participate from early on within the investigation. And I know with such a diverse group on this call, I think we've all experienced, differences in how evidence is collected from, the onset of a crime scene investigation.
Well, tradition, I guess, is and inertia, habit, lack of recognition of the importance of the scientist, and also just to pick up on one thing you said there. I don't know whether it's the word participation, but more than just the presence and participation, there needs to be an assignment of responsibility. Somebody in charge that has what we're talking about. I know in many jurisdictions, and the one was the one you used to work for, Adam. In my observations from outside of that agency, very often the scientists that went to the scene were there as handmaidens to swab and that kind of thing, and nothing of any real, responsibility or leadership or decision making. We won't name the agency, I guess, but anyway. Does that adequately answer the question, or?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, of course. I'm just taking a look at the chat here. Just a comment from Ralph Ristenblatt from Penn State. He just said, "Dear Peter, as usual, timely, excellent, and crucially important. Thank you." I have
Well,
another
I
question
can't
for
answer
you
that.
until others arrive. You touched upon this during your presentation, but I'm going to try to phrase this as best as I can, or maybe just a topic for conversation in terms of, trace evidence generally lacking a statistical basis for comparison purposes in comparison to something like, DNA. If a lab was considering, eliminating their trace evidence section, what would you say to them? And in terms of the importance of trace evidence, even in the absence of a statistical foundation.
Well, first of all, it's a misunderstanding, and we're talking about trace evidence labs now, which are only part of what we've been talking about in terms of traces. Those that are directed toward working with materials that provide associative evidence information. My whole talk has been much more general about understanding the past, but just confining it to the existing practice of trace evidence in laboratories and the idea of that service being eliminated, it's because of misunderstandings. Things are not the way that people think. It's been mischaracterized. There are a lot of things you can do in a matter of seconds with a microscope that will answer important questions. These very often things don't need to be worked out to the nth degree in terms of probability, because you're working with a closed set of possibilities. I mean, these are things that realistically limit the amount of investment of time and that kind of thing put into it. But there is this, widely held belief on the part of administrators that trace evidence in that context is expensive, and it needn't be. And there are things that can be done in a matter of seconds that can answer important questions. And a lot of times what they can do is redirect the laboratory investigation. A quick understanding of something with something as simple as a stereo microscope, or a quick thing with the polarized light microscope, can now direct you to another solution of the problem involving all kinds of hyphenated instrumental techniques and that kind of thing. That and those get missed. If that first step isn't taken, there's no recognition of what the potential of the other more highfalutin instruments might be. I could get pretty excited about this, but I'll try to restrain myself. But anyway, no, it's very, very important, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the existing kind of practice of trace evidence that make it seem as though it's not a worthwhile investment. But there's also almost a complete lack of awareness of this more general concept of the trace and the idea of using traces to understand the past.
So now I'm going to pick on someone for a moment, just in the interest of keeping the conversation going. But I'd like to ask Rod Kennedy, if possible, if you could take yourself off of mute. The general topic of could scientists do a better job of educating attorneys and judges, for that matter, and if so, how? What avenues could be taken to kind of bridge this gap between our knowledge base and your knowledge base, for example?
Well, Adam, first I'd like to turn that around and ask if lawyers can more appropriately educate scientists as to what they should do in a courtroom. And I'm doing that facetiously. For now. No, I think that a common joke among lawyers is that we got into law because we didn't want to handle science and math. That we saw a periodic table on on a wall, and we thought it had really nice colors, and we quit the science class when we realized we had to deal with numbers. But when you look at the development of science, and the development of science within forensic science particularly, the lawyers have to be schooled as to the yardsticks to apply to forensic science evidence, particularly that comes into court, that make it more meaningful. Not just that in the old days, an examiner would say, "Oh, I matched this with 100% certainty." Well, great. These days we say, "We're really happy you can do that, and don't think you're going to get on a witness stand." In my case, because there are now standards that talk about testifying in terms of probabilities and likelihoods of similarities meaning something. And though that bit of education, when you look at the Daubert decision itself, it says that standards-based methodologies based on the scientific method are the main criterion for scientific evidence. When you look at Cumho, it says that people are supposed to apply the same professional rigor to generating testimony and opinions for court that they do in their regular professional life. And fundamentally, what that means in both situations is that lawyers have to understand more and more of science, how it's validated, how it's regulated, how it's accomplished, to make testimony more meaningful in the case. Because in trace evidence, Dr. DeForest will say, your purpose is to make, kind of like in a Les McCann song from the 60s, make the trace evidence real compared to what in the context of the case. You provide the trace evidence. If it's a fingerprint, it just sits there, unless it's significant to some relevance in the case. Who cares? And how that's done, in a way that makes it important enough that the opinion that it came from a source is sufficiently justified to use as evidence when you're putting somebody in jail for life, for instance, is the thing that lawyers have to pay more attention to. We're doing it. I mean, scientific evidence at a law school. I know other people who do too. And more and more that's coming up. At the same time, we have to be helped by the forensic science community by being told what the good applications of forensic science are when we choose to use it. Probably too long, but I hope it works.
Oh, no, thank you. There was another question that came in from George Sensabaugh. If you could take yourself off of mute.
Hi, Pete. Enjoyed your presentation. We've talked about these issues many times, mostly over drinks, and I hope we'll be able, on a different coast, to be able to catch up on that before too long. The question that I had involves excuse me, I've got the same problem Peter had.
Yeah,
I'll call you back. That was Jeff. You pointed out early on that you develop hypotheses, when you're deciding what is relevant and what is not relevant. But there's another point to having hypotheses as well. And that is that if you have a hypothesis, you want to be able to eliminate alternative hypotheses. And so if you want to provide support support for a hypothesis, you have to think about what sort of observations or experiments would negate the hypothesis that you're putting to test. And this is something that can be done in the laboratory. In some cases, it can be done in the at the scenes by looking at I think with your the bullet case that you illustrated, you were able to eliminate some things, some possibilities of the event. And so, and this is very important because there's certainly, I've been asked, isn't it so that anything could happen? And the answer is no, anything can't happen, but you have to be able to demonstrate those things that you can distinguish as not being possible or plausible to establish what is possible or likely. And so, that's an important part of the thinking process, the scientific thinking process from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. But what we're talking about there at the scene is a series of tentative hypotheses that are, you're sort of evaluating mentally that these aren't the level of hypotheses that you're getting into the laboratory and going to take, actually investigate to take to court. And clearly, I mean, when we get to court, we want to have considered all possible alternate hypotheses before settling a one. But in terms of what's going on at the scene, very often you entertain something mentally for a few seconds, discard it, you try something else, and it's the working hypotheses that we're really talking about at the scene. And there's almost an automatic elimination of some that are recognized as being alternatives that could explain something. Does that help?
Well, yeah,
we do need that drink, I think, but anyway.
Yeah. That certainly is the case, but this also emphasizes the importance of documentation, documentation of a scene, because sometimes an idea may come up after the fact, and you need to know whether you can eliminate it or have to consider it as a plausible event. And sometimes you can go back to the documentation of the scene and get some answer to it, even though at the time the scene was being documented, no one thought about that particular.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's, what I refer to as the dichotomy between active documentation, where you have a purpose in mind for, versus passive, which you hope to cover the waterfront to deal with those eventualities that may arise later. But it's where you have a choice. The idea of being able to have active documentation is ideal, but you don't want to forget the value of the passive documentation, where it's being done without knowledge of something that just wasn't observed or considered at the time.
Oh, well, anyway, I enjoyed your presentation, and
Thank you, George. And I
want to try to get hold of that wired paper. That's not one I was aware of.
I should point out that George and I were classmates at Berkeley 50 some years ago, and so George is a world-renowned expert in the biological aspects of forensic science, plus other things as well. But he certainly, a lot of you already know George by name, so. But there may be people here that don't. So.
There was a question that was posed. I don't know if you want to address it publicly or privately, but it was asking, what are your thoughts on the future of the forensic science program at Jay?
I don't know enough about the details of what's going on. I'd be willing to investigate it and advise on that issue, but at this point I'd be speaking through my hat. So I will decline an opinion. So.
If there were any questions that came in within the last 5 minutes, if you wouldn't mind resubmitting them, because even though I'm the host, I somehow managed to get kicked out of the meeting and then rejoined the meeting. And so now I'm back and everything's good again. But I did have a little bit of a moment of being concerned, but now I'm okay. Let me ask, if I can, Peter, what advice would you have, and that's a very open-ended question, of course, would you have for the younger forensic scientists on the meeting today? You know, from what you've learned from your career and where the field currently stands, any advice that you'd be willing to share with them for their benefit?
Well, you know, this can be a very, very rewarding and satisfying field, but I, you know, would append to that evaluation that it will in many ways be what you make it. And that I think given our current situation, you should be struggling at all times to try to incorporate more science in the entire continuum from crime scene to courtroom. And you know, I didn't want to get into it today with the courtroom, but there are situations that arise in the presentation of evidence where we sometimes just turn over responsibility of our conclusions to a prosecutor, and it may not go in the way that we'd like it to go in. It may be overstated. That it happens with some frequency. And so anyway, is that address what you would like there, Adam? Or, but I think it's a fantastic field to get into, potentially very, very, very satisfying, rewarding. If you get into a role where you're doing boring stuff, you want to find another employment setting before you are heavily invested in the retirement system. So,
Right. No, that's great. I didn't have a specific answer in mind. I just kind of, I know there are many students from a variety of different universities and programs on the call today. So I just wanted to make sure that I had asked that.
yeah, bringing it up is a good thing there. And I do think that the future of the field is dependent upon young people. So, like the future of our world is dependent upon young people. But anyway, but specifically in this, it's a lot that people from the inside can do. There are a lot of constraints on, you know, within certain employment settings, but it isn't impossible to make waves and affect some change potentially. So particularly, you know, getting together with thinking members of an association and strength in numbers idea. But anyway, so
another question just came in from George Moffat. If you'd like to take yourself off of mute.
Hi, George. I haven't seen you in 20 some years, I guess. So, but I do miss you. I spent a semester at the Police Staff College in Brams Hill in the fall of 1997, and George was assigned as my mother hen to take me around, introduce me to people, and make sure I didn't get into trouble. He saved me from a mistake in buying a car at an auction and got my money back on it. But anyway, I'm interrupting, George, so I'll let you go ahead there. But
Peter, it's really, really good to see you again. And my question is simply, have your visits to other countries revealed crime scene policies and techniques that could be considered in the US? Shall I repeat the question?
yeah, I wonder if you could make it a little bit louder. I think I see Nora behind you there. So
have your visits have your visits to other countries revealed crime scene policies and techniques that could be considered in the US?
Well, I mean, you know, in my view, it's totally, you know, what's being done is totally inadequate, and it needs to be revisited thoroughly, and, you know, revisited. There is you know, broadly speaking, just a total lack of recognition of the importance of the scene as being a scientific problem. So don't know whether that was adequate.
Well,
Hey, Lorna, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Peter. I'm so pleased to see you. You
Very
can't
good.
honestly imagine how pleased I am to
Okay.
see you.
That's what, 20,
Oh,
23
don't.
years? I don't know, 4 years.
Peter, it's just that I mean, we spent some time discussing this at the National Crime Faculty in the UK. And I wondered whether there was anything that you'd seen there that was a useful addition to your armory when you came back to the US.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I really thought that was a very useful model. And my understanding is it is no longer in effect, right? It was the baby went out with the bathwater or whatever.
Yeah, well, sadly, Bram's Hill has been is no longer there now. It's that they've moved that. But you're right. The idea behind it was to put scientists and investigators together to exchange ideas and try to, to improve crime scene examination. And of course, if you remember, they had psychologists working there as well to do the human behavior, the behavioral science side of the,
I remember there was a help desk, which I thought was useful. And the people that were in residence were seconded, a term I learned in England. But anyway, they were ostensibly employees of other investigative agencies, and they were assigned as a credit to the agency to lend their expertise to the central crime faculty. And in a way, it's much better than any kind of system I've seen where you have a super agency come in and sort of take ownership of the case. I think it led to a much better sharing of responsibility and credit, and maybe I'll name names here, but I've been troubled for many years by some of the ways that cases get handled by the local police department turning something over to the FBI or something, and then the super agency takes credit for what was some insights that somebody in the lower echelons had. I mean, I think there was a lot to be said for the crime faculty model, I thought. So,
thanks, Peter. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for linking up across the Atlantic here. So.
We have another question, Peter. I think we can probably take a couple more questions before some closing remarks. This question came in from Joe C. If you'd like to ask by taking yourself off of mute. Otherwise, I could read the question for you.
Yes, thank you. I apologize for the scratchy audio. I'm having trouble with my internet today, so hopefully this comes through. First of all, Peter, great presentation. Really loved the opportunity to learn from you today. So my question is, you mentioned some need for scientific advancement and in forensics and wanting, to sort of inspire the younger generation. I appreciate that. I was young once myself. So I just want to know if you think the advancement in more of the innovation side of forensics, digital forensics like e-discovery, tracing cryptocurrencies and things like that, the resources and the talent, do they seem to be going over there? And is that coming at the expense of some of the traditional forensic sciences that you're used to and that you mentioned in your presentation?
Well, my philosophy is emphasizes the generalist. The generalist may have specialties as well, limited number of specialties, but so there's nothing mutually exclusive between being a generalist and a specialist in a limited number of areas. But the most important tool here is the scientific mind. It's that problem-solving mind that is the most important thing, and everything else, DNA, deployable, field deployable instrumentation. All these things are tools, and they're nothing more than tools. And they're handy tools. But nothing can replace the scientific observations and thought process. And I think we need to continually remind ourselves of that, and make sure that we're putting the emphasis in the right place and not getting enamored or seduced by fancy stuff. When I think back to, it sounds funny to say this, but it was 60 years ago that I started in the Ventura Sheriff's Lab. We had a single beam UV spectrophotometer, no IR. We got a GC later that year. There was a colorimeter. There were some biological microscopes. A good polescope didn't happen until just before I was leaving. But anyway, the tools are just that. They're tools, and how they're taken advantage of really depends upon the scientist defining the problem and utilizing them. And to the extent that the tools obscure that relationship, it's very unfortunate. So,
Peter, there's a question from Joe Peterson, if you'd like to ask, Joe.
I saw Joe earlier. Oh, there he is. Okay. You got to unmute, I guess, Joe.
Yeah. Hi, Peter.
Hi. Hi, Jenny in the background.
Enjoyed your presentation very much. And we've talked about this problem of, given the fact that most scenes involve police officers and investigators who arrive at the scene long before a scientist from a laboratory ever gets there, how do we introduce this scientific thinking among these personnel so that even before the scientist has the opportunity to examine the evidence?
Well, assign them to securing the scene and nothing more. I mean, that's a harsh thing to say, but I have been called to many scenes that they're saying they're preserving from my arrival. And I remember one recently, as we have it in our book we're writing, Brooke, if you're there somewhere, where I had to drive to another state. And when I got there were two guys that had sprayed two different protein enhancing reagents over the wall, and they were spraying enhancement reagents over patent patterns. I mean, it was stuff was just running down the wall. It was just destruction of evidence, So there's no substitute. I mean, we can talk about ways of trying to smooth the the introduction gradually. I mean, this is not going to happen overnight, and I will not be around when and if it does happen. But I think it's very, very important, and the kind of success that I would like to see is not going to take place until we really have a full recognition of the importance of the scientific reasoning and problem solving at the scene. So I know we're talking complex questions and involved answers there, but anyway, it's
well, thank you. Great presentation, Peter.
I mean, you have a lot of experience with dealing with the people in crime scenes and all that kind of stuff, and research on that. So I appreciate your thinking about it and all that kind of stuff. So, and I appreciate the question.
I wanted to ask if Dennis Hilliard, who's the director of the Rhode Island State Crime Lab, I don't know if you wanted to make a comment, Dennis.
Hey, Peter, how are you? Good presentation.
All right.
So, at the University of Rhode Island, we do have a course we structure for law enforcement to teach them how the scientific method. And I think we worked it pretty well in Rhode Island. Basically giving them the same course that an introductory student in forensic science would get, basic crimes. And this is something that Dr. Harrison started way back in the 1950s. And I also of the opinion that the educational background of most police officers has risen over my 40 years in the business. I mean, when I started in I hate to put it, 77, education quality was high school. Today, it's at least 2 years of college and more. So I think we can train officers in the scientific method because there's not enough forensic scientists to go around to visit every crime scene. There's more police than there are of us. So I think teaching them the scientific method and teaching the proper protocols so they're not spraying patent prints with liquids to try to develop something behind it. I don't know what the thinking was behind that. They probably attended a 1 hour training session by the manufacturer and said, oh, try this. We teach them the method. We have them work in the laboratories. They get hands-on training, which they need. It's just not book learning. It needs hands-on training. So I think,
I think any of these things are a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But the scientific method is not the be-all and end-all of science. There are very, very simplified manifestations of using the scientific method to change a light bulb, or whatever some of these trivialized things are. But the scientific method combined with the in-depth scientific knowledge is the ideal thing. And so it's nice for people to be educated to approach something in a logical thing. But the ideal thing that I'm arguing for some eon in the future is that we I think, Dennis, what you're talking about would be an interim kind of thing that would help get us there eventually. But you can't make a scientist by just teaching them a scientific method. That's
well, there has to be some common sense involved too.
No,
it's not one course that's going to make them a lifetime experience.
We need the combination of the in-depth scientific knowledge, the experience, the the mentoring. It's a long road there. The long road, I guess, is the way. But in your situation where the laboratory is part of the university, do you have a different relationship when you send scientists to the scene? Do they have scene control and that kind of thing, or are you?
No, we come out at their pleasure. If they want us, we offer our assistance, and we come out there to do, like you said, swab and make sure to point things out.
Yeah.
We had a recent case where I offered our assistance, and they said, "Oh, we don't think we need it." So I can't just barge in and become part of that scene. You have to be invited in.
Yeah, that's far from my ideal, but
Right.
The handmaiden thing is just not the solution. And one thing too that's a ongoing deficiency in the idea of police personnel being the sole scene investigators is that the turnover is traditionally quite high. And so in addition to the lack of the scientific background, there's a better job waiting in promotion doing something different. And so this is a lifelong enterprise, really mastering the scientific analysis of a crime scene. It's nothing you do as a ticket punching stop on the road to promotion. It's so that's just one aspect of it that I find fault with. But the other is that you really can't make a sub purse out of a sow's ear, is the crude way of putting that, I guess. But it takes years and years to make a scientist, and hard work and self-flagellation and all that kind of stuff. So
I'm going to open it up for one last question that came in from Anna Duggar. If you'd like to take yourself off of mute.
Hello, Professor.
Hi, congratulations on getting the dissertation finished. So.
Thank you. Last stages. So that I'm a serious believer in crime scene analysis as iterative hypothesis testing. but I've been frustrated over the years by the caste system in the forensic sciences that regularly treats crime scene work as not a real science. Do you have any idea where those of us listening could possibly apply pressure to reshape that attitude? And is there any role for academic programs in doing so?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the last part, the role, yes, for the academic programs. You know, I think many scientific professions are enriched by a close relationship between academia and the practice, and so that I think should be encouraged. I don't know whether I should query Joe Peterson on that, but you know, Joe was at Cal State LA, and during his well, I guess it was actually before you got there. Maybe Barry Fisher was the one that got it started there. But basically, the two laboratories in Los Angeles City and County are in the same building with the academic program, and it certainly has great potential. Maybe if there's time for Joe to comment on the realization of potential, that would be interesting. But no, I think it's a very, very important role for the contributions of academia to the practice.
So,
thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I think it is a model that should be promoted. And I don't know if Kathy Roberts is, I saw that she was on at one point, but I think it is a viable model, and I would like to see that model of a academic program being, combined with the forensic labs in that community be practiced more. So I think it is a very helpful thing to do.
Okay, so I think we could go on for hours with this, but I am getting a little subtle pressure to little by little wrap this up. I do want to say that we had over 280 registrants. At one point, we had nearly over 250 online. I think the additional 30 or so are planning to watch the recorded presentation, which all of you will receive a link to the recording of the presentation. And so I just, well, first, before I say anything further, I'd like everyone to just take themselves off of mute and make a bunch of noise and put your hands together for Dr. DeForest.
Hey.
Proud of you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for everything. Thank you for my career.
I can say that this is probably the largest Zoom presentation I've ever participated in, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I'd like to thank everyone for joining, for participating. We all know that Dr. DeForest has had a significant impact on our field, and each one of us in different ways, personally and professionally. And many former students of his joined the call today, and many current students of my own are also here, as well as from other universities and programs around the United States and across the world, for that matter. So I think it's honestly a true testament to your accomplishments in your own life. And I've enjoyed all the conversations with you that have led up to today's event, and just thankful to have the opportunity to have those conversations with you. I'd also like to thank Hanain Husseini, who from Northeastern University, combined with Patricia Flint, helped to organize this session today along with myself, and to congratulate you once again on this award. And I know that Dr. Saferstein and you were also close, and I think he was always very proud of these lectures, and I distinctly recall him in the back of the room oftentimes. And at one point I asked him, I said, why are you always in the back? You're a fairly important guy, you should probably be up front. And he said, well, I like actually to be in the back, because I like to kind of see everyone who has come and you know, because this was always something very important to me and to my family. And it's been a nice tradition to carry on and to see, you know, over the course of time, everyone that has joined. And so we all know that COVID has presented any number of challenges in all of our lives, but I can say that the turnout today wouldn't have been possible if everyone was expected to come to Boston. And I know that there are participants here from Boston to New York to Sydney, Australia, and to the United Kingdom and everywhere in between. So I think that's just absolutely wonderful. So thank you once again. I don't know if you would like to say a couple of final thoughts.
Well, you know, I appreciate the opportunity. I think the role of young people in the future is so important. And again, I'm just so proud of the people that I've worked with as students over the years and the things that they have accomplished. I mean, you know, these are exceptional experiences I've had that I find very, very enriching. You know, just seeing what my former students have done and accomplished is just, oh, it's so, so rewarding. But anyway, it's get teary-eyed thinking about it. But anyway, so yeah, I'm glad we had the opportunity. I think this thing that was set up by Rich Saferstein and then his family is really a good thing, and so I would like to see it continue in whatever format it takes. I mean, I think this might be the preferable one to the dinner of a handful of people rather than having this wide participation and you know, across the globe here. So thank you very much. I'm deeply honored and I thank you. So
one last thing, I entered into the chat once again. There is a session following this that was organized by Michelle Miranda. If anyone would like to have an opportunity to raise a glass of, I don't know what time it is where you are. It's 5 o'clock somewhere and it happens to be just after 5 o'clock here. So why not? In honor and recognition of Dr. DeForest's award, entered in the Google Meet link that all of you could copy and paste. And I'd like to thank her for organizing that, because normally in person, we would have an opportunity to have several glasses of wine or whatever you prefer on Northeastern's dime. So unfortunately, it's on your dime this time, but I think that's something that Peter would appreciate for anybody who would like to join and continue this conversation.
So thank you very much, and I am going to join the virtual drinking session, and I think Rebecca in Finland is the one that we have to consider. Sort of was the trigger behind getting this thing going, but anyway, but it gets it's midnight there, I think. If it isn't Finland about 2 time zones east of the prime meridian, I think. But anyway, so I didn't see Rebecca's face among this myriad of images here, but I'm sure I see quite a few faces I recognize there. But anyway, so.
Hey, Dr. D, here's your favorite. I raise a glass of the J-Lore Cabernet to you.
All right.
Thank you for everything.
You've already started here. Okay. That's what we need, is leadership. That's important.
Nice. Nice.
That's the former head of the Peter DeForest fan club. Many years.
Only president ever.
Oh yeah, right. That's right. I failed after that to garner any fans, I guess. But anyway, so there was a president, there were bylaws and secretary, right? So there were official things. I was a good-looking guy back then. So anyway, I'm rambling here, I guess. So anyway, but I will be joining any of you that like in this next whatever is it? Is it a Google session? Is that what it is?
So I just entered it into the chat one last time, and little by little, people will start dropping off of this, and then I'll end the session in just a couple of minutes here.
All right. Well, I'll stay in case anybody has any last minute things to I'm eager to get my glass of wine, but I have priorities, you know, so.
John Lantini's legs. All right, scrolling out. Take care, Peter.
All right, well, thank you.
Hi, Peter.
Bye,
Lydia, you better tell me about your new job. I just learned about that recently, so. I don't know whether you can hear me, Lydia, but anyway.
You were talking to me?
Yep.
Yep, okay, I will. Well, I just got here.
I was in the dark. I didn't know about this great new.
Well, I guess it's a testament to you, my career. That's why.
This is now lab director.
Yes, sir. We'll talk about it.
Okay, all right.
All
You're
right.
close by. We can.
I will.
Put our masks on and
there you go.
Put a little slit for the wine glass. But anyway.
Sorry, Desiree.
Not exactly approved, I guess. But,
Hey, Peter, in a couple of weeks, we'll raise a couple of bottles, okay?
All right. Okay. Sounds fine.
All right, Bob.
See you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Sooner than you think.
Lunch. We'll talk about all the great times we had with Dr. DeForest.
That sounds like a plan.
Or I gotta bail out. I gotta make dinner for the kids.
Nice. Very good.
Well, thank
Get
you all.
going, Bob. Make some extra for the rest of us.
All right. Take it easy, Des.
Goodbye from Lorna and George. Thank you. It's been
Happy
great.
memories, Peter, as well. Many, many happy memories.
Oh,
Lots
thank
of
you.
love.
Okay.